Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of The Walking Dead, The Ones Who Live. It was called Bye. And as it starts, it's a few years in the past where Rick arrives for the first time at his new home after surviving the bridge explosion. And he's approached by Jadis, who seems like a normal person at this time, and tries to justify sending him there, though he's not buying it. In the more recent past, Rick goes to Thorne after Michonne's arrival to tell her to look out for Michonne and keep her from getting sent away as an alpha, which I guess is how she survived her interview process and was let in. He then finds Jadis in his place again, and she's her usual psychotic self, which means she again threatens to kill everyone he loves if he tries to run with Michonne, which Jadis thinks would mean they'd succeed where Rick alone failed. Michonne, meanwhile, is on walker duty at the wall, and there's a voiceover to Judith, though she's using Japanese names for herself and Judith. And it's about how Rick's been stuck there. She then meets a lady and kicks some walker ass a bit too stylishly in front of soldiers and this lady. The Major General eulogizes Okafor somewhat colorfully. Thorne and Rick talk about when Thorne was first taken in by Okafor, who recognized she was an alpha before the Major General shows up and takes her off with him and gives her a promotion after apparently giving her something called the Echelon Briefing, where they lay out what is otherwise apparently a bunch of secret information about the state of things in the organization to people that reach a certain level. Rick makes a note about the timing of some bombs going off in the distance, which are apparently referred to as disruption charges, and later he passes Michonne a note telling her that they are going to try to escape that night. He leaves her a key and a map to a canoe in a locker, as well as her katana. They both head away from the base separately through some tunnels under the base as the disruption charges go off, bringing out the dead. Michonne gets to the canoe and finds a note telling her that Rick's not actually coming and that she needs to get away and go back to Judith, where he has to stay, or it'll mean danger for everyone. Rick then tells Jadis that Michonne is gone and that he set it up so people would think she died trying to escape, and that Jadis needs to make that become the narrative. But it turns out Michonne didn't leave, and come daylight, she's back at her job at the wall, kicking Walker ass. So Rick confronts her and makes his case in person that she needs to go and let him stay, but she walks away without saying a word. She then does another voiceover to Judith, which mentions the idea again of knowing when to go, which is from the previous episode, and questioning whether or not she made the right choice to not go before she comes upon a street vendor who paints pictures on device screens and realizes that it's the man who painted her on her phone and talks to him. He remembers her name and that she had Judith with her when they had previously met years ago, and mentions to her that back then Carl had asked him to draw for him as well, but he couldn't really ever produce anything exactly the way Carl wanted it. They talk about Rick, and the theme of believe just a little bit longer comes up because, as I understand it, the man tells her that Rick would go visit him across the time that he was there to have him draw her because he was trying to remember her, but then I guess at some point wanted to try to forget, and the guy had to remind him to just believe a little bit longer. And then I guess she came across the phone later. Is that what I'm to understand? Just like she came across his boots? I wasn't clear on that. But anyway, that's what it seemed like, and it was a really poignant scene. Anyway, later Thorne and Rick pick up Michonne and take her to the place Okafor had taken the two of them before, and Thorne interrogates her about why she saved Rick, doubting her answers before explaining that she knows she's an A and offers her the same choice that Okafor offered Thorne and Rick, which she accepts. And when I say saved Rick, I'm referring to when his helicopter crashed and everybody died but Rick, and the assumption was that Michonne saved him. This is a really tense scene because the whole time Thorne was like getting ready to kill Michonne if she didn't like her answers, and Rick was getting ready to kill Thorne in return, and so, but which didn't happen obviously, but it was a very tense scene. Michonne is then taken cross country by helicopter to a base where a mission to wipe out a walker horde is going to be undertaken. When Thorne gets a piece of sound equipment that they were going to use to, I guess, attract walkers in a certain direction, stuck in the mud and abandons it, Michonne defies her order to stay behind and gets it unstuck and goes to deploy it before Rick joins her and helps her do it. Thorne then almost shoots Michonne as she's manually taking down walkers, but Rick stops her. She then scolds him before telling him that the Major General wants to give him the briefing. Rick then tells Michonne he's getting her out one way or another and that they're over. But when she then goes to jump out a helicopter on the way back to the base, she pulls Rick with her. And that's where the episode ended. So this show continues to be really, really good. And I know I've said this every week, and I know I've said it during my reviews of the other two spin-offs that I reviewed, but where was this writing in the last few seasons of The Walking Dead? Like at a certain point, they got off the comic book and they were on their own, and it just kind of tanked. But they clearly know how to write this show, whoever's writing it now. So I just don't know what happened. This show is fantastic. It's like somewhere along the line, new breath got breathed into the creatives behind it. And it's just so freaking good. The actress who plays Thorne, who was in Spartacus and Lucifer, is pulling off some incredible acting in this show. I never thought much of her as an actress. I didn't think anything was wrong with her acting, but I didn't ever think she was especially good. But in this, she's fantastic. She's really, really good in this part of a military woman with a sort of dark past who is just laser focused on ascending the ranks and furthering the mission of the CRM. And she's just incredible in this. And, the scene where Michonne is talking to the artist and he talks about, remembering her, and she talks about how she's been looking for Rick and, I guess to kind of throw him off because she's already found him. But, he brings up the theme again of believe just a little bit longer, which, I think is what carried her through to the point she's at, and she says as much to the guy. And they made a big deal of that sort of theme in the second episode, and it's really what this show lacked in the last few seasons, some kind of thematic underpinning, thematic strength. I mean, the whole idea of the ones who live was sort of the theme of like the end game of the original show, and it was the, if I'm not mistaken, title of the final episode of the main show, and it was sort of the concept of the ones who live was sort of weaved in, but I thought it came off weak. I didn't think it landed, but everything they're doing on this show is landing, and I think it's really, really great. There are some things I don't understand, like why the secrecy and why Jadis thinks she would have to kill everybody in Rick's family to keep him from escaping, because I guess she'd get in trouble if he escaped because she lied and said he was a bee. I don't know. I don't understand what that's about, but I think that's going to become clearer, I should say, over the next few episodes. But it looks like the cat's out of the bag now to a certain extent. In other words, Rick and Michonne have been playing this game where, they're pretending to be dutiful citizens and a dutiful member of the military, just towing the line and not being troublemakers, and then they escape. Rick, of course, against his will, but that's not how the Major General is going to see it. So I think the jig is up at the halfway point of the season here. I think everybody's going to start to understand that they knew each other and that, they're both A's, and I think Jadis is going to be involved. And it should be interesting to see where they go in the next three episodes. I'm also forced to wonder, by this show in particular, where they're going with all this, because we already know from World Beyond where things are 10 years later. And I didn't think much of that show. And I didn't think the picture of where things were terribly clear, but we had glimpses of it. And you'd think for 10 years later, this organization that Rick is in now, this city state that he lives in now, would have expanded by then. And, again, it's a regional thing maybe where there are different regions under different control, but like there was no hint of this in any of the shows. So I don't know. I don't know where they're going with it, but I would like to see an end game for the universe at some point. I don't want it to just peter out and they never, wrap it up. I want to see them wrap it up at some point, and I thought maybe they had ended it at the end of The Walking Dead proper, and they had decided not to wrap it up, but then they came out with the spin-off shows. And this one is probably the closest successor to the original. And so if they're going to head in that direction at all, it's going to be on this show, and I'm just wondering how far they're going to go before this season ends, and are they going to do another season? We'll have to see, because Andrew, what's his name that plays Rick, has left the show once before, so how committed is he now to seasons, repeated seasons? Michonne as well, so we don't know. Hopefully they do 2 or 3 seasons, and hopefully at some point they wrap up this universe. But this show is really, really strong. I really, really like it, and I can't believe that the last couple of seasons of the original show were so bad. Given that they can produce quality like this, it's really mind-blowing to me. But that's really it. I think this is a great show. All 3 episodes have been really good, and I'm just looking forward to next week. I'll be back to do a recap and review of that episode once it's released. I'm gonna get out of here for now. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.